Welcome to Just an Average Citizen podcast, the podcast that helps inform, educate, and empower you to make an impact in Abilene and the Big Country. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. Before I go any further, let me just let you know how important it is that you join me and willing to share this podcast with your friends and family. It's hard to help inform and educate people who haven't heard all the good things we're talking about. So if you could share that, that'd be great. If you want to go to justanaveragetcitizen.com, there's lots of platforms that you can check out and subscribe to. And if you feel so led to support what we're doing, that would be awesome because we can do more. The more subscribers we get and the more feedback we get from you on what is needed in order to help you make an impact in our community. I was a little disappointed last week that we weren't able to get all the platforms up and running as much as I would like to, but I guess we can't have everything done instantly, and there is a learning curve to creating media going on this many different directions. But it's been really fun, and I've been enjoying getting to participate in helping you make an impact in the community. I hope you notice I don't have those ugly bun-like Star Wars Leia headphones anymore. We've decided that it really isn't necessary, and my vanity got the best of me, so now I am going headphone free. So hopefully the sounds okay. But anyway, it's just a fun learning curve trying to figure out how to get this done, and many props to those who've gone before and showed us the way. So now on to great things happening in our city. I really can't go much further without addressing the election. I will say that this was the first time I've ever worked as a poll clerk in an election, and I had no idea. I had no idea how much information I would learn about our elections, about voting, about the importance of being informed, just by doing the training. And so if you have not ever been a part of an election, whether it's poll watching or being a poll clerk or a poll judge, then I would highly encourage you to do that. The next election will be in March, and we need active citizens like yourself willing to either take a day off to work the poll or work it. If you don't have to take the day off, that's great. But it is that important that I would say using a vacation day to be a part of this process is key to making a greater impact in our area. Because if we don't have secure and safe elections, what really can we count on? And so doing that taught me a lot. We were busy this week with that. And I got to observe some really interesting processes. I saw many people come to the polling location I was at, and they would grab that yellow sample ballot that was available for you to read. And while I think it is important for you to be able to read all the things before you get onto the actual polling location, I really was disappointed at how little people realized there was really not any information given on those sample ballots. It just literally said what it was. It's like wanting to read a book and all you do is look at titles. And you never actually open the book. You just read a title and you're trying to get the information from that title about the book. And many times that's not possible. And so if you're not finding a way to get information before you show up to the polls and bringing that with you in a printed form, then you're really going to have a hard time, especially at these constitutional amendment elections, to make sense of what is being said. I really came up with this example that I thought was fitting because a lot of the propositions, especially the constitutional amendments, were written in such a way that led you to vote the way they wanted you to vote. Now, it didn't necessarily mean that's what it was saying, but it was really bothering to me that they could write it in that way. I remember probably over 10 years ago, we decided to take a family vacation, and we ditched Christmas and birthdays, and we saved up because we wanted to have a great experience. And so I told my kids, I said, hey kids, how would you like to do this big trip? Would you like to go to Disney World? And they were like, yeah, that sounds great. And so then I looked at Disney World and I saw how expensive Disney World was. And this was a whole nother world to go. So mind you, it was a little overwhelming. And I thought, okay, this is more than I was thinking it was going to cost. And then the option came up first to go to the beach. And I said, whew, the beach, the water, the sand, we can hang out and have fun. And that is way less expensive than Disney World. So as a parent, I wanted to go to the beach. And Disney World could wait until another day. And as I presented that to my kids, I said, hey kids, would you rather go to the beach with the waves and the sand and the surf or Disney World? And thankfully, my plan worked and my kids said the beach. So that year we were able to take a trip to the beach, and it was an amazing trip. It had nothing to do with the less quality, but it was definitely more affordable for our budget. And so I feel like sometimes that's what's happening in elections. They're like presenting us with the information, but it's got a bent to it, even on the ballot. And that is really hard for my justice-minded heart to understand, because it should be pretty black and white and straightforward. And we should know that if we're protecting farmers, that we're protecting farmers. Or if we want to help universities do research, no, even a better one, if we want to make sure we have water, that we realize that we've already given a whole heck of a lot of money to solve this very problem. So why should we be giving more? And again, I'm not really trying to give you a whole lot of opinions, but I'm just letting you know that there is some information that has been left out of those ballot propositions. And if you're not finding great sources to understand what groups are for these propositions, what groups are against them, and a lot of times if you know groups that stand similar to the ideals you hold, then you can find why they say this is a good or a bad thing, and that gives you the ability to be educated and informed. But really showing up without any kind of research done or written information done is really perpetuating the problem. And that's one of the goals of myself and those who I work with, is we're trying to make sure you understand the process so that you can help others join in, not just duplicate the ideas that we hold as our own. And so that's why I'm trying to make sure this is a place where you can find basic information that you can trust comes from a reliable source that is not going to try and push you in one direction or another. And so thanks for sharing it. But let's move on, because I'm sure you're ready to talk about the election. I was really interested to see how this was presented on the city agenda, or the city council agenda. And sadly, it is being put through the consent agenda. So there will be no discussion unless somebody pulls it on Thursday. So I thought it would be good to talk about here. So I was trying to look for some good metrics on how to prepare to know if we're making an impact and we are empowering citizens to be educated and informed. And there's really no way, because, depending on how you vote and how you perceive these things and what connections you have, we all aren't going to agree on the zoo master plan improvements. So it's really not easy to say, oh, look, it passed, then that means everyone's for this, or it didn't pass, this is, or look how many voted against it, that means this. It's really hard to know at this stage in the game where people stand. And we want to sure up what's going on our city, because if our city can be fortified and built on a strong foundation and get going in a healthier direction, then we know we can make a greater impact in the state of Texas. And if the state of Texas can get more solid in its foundation and make sure we're going in the right path, then we will make a positive impact in our nation. And that's how our founders really wanted us to process this. We weren't supposed to worry about DC first. We're supposed to take care of our own homes first, get our house in order, and then start taking care of others. Because if we don't have a city that can help move forward the things that we know are best for our community, then it doesn't matter what changes we make in other places, for the most part. But it's not a black and white thing. So there's a process to it all. And we do need to be involved in what's going on in our state for sure, especially with this upcoming primary election in March. But back to our local elections and what happened here. I didn't know how to measure this. I didn't know how to get a good gauge until I was in poll clerk training. And one of the things that was mentioned by the elections official was that they would expect between 5,000 and 10,000 people to show up at this election, because it was a constitutional amendment election. Not many people show up because they don't understand it. And that made me sad. So I thought, what can we do to make a difference? And so one of the things we did was bring attention to the election. We knew that if we could get more people to start regularly showing up to elections, then we would make an impact. One way or the other, we would make an impact. And so Wednesday morning, I woke up from my 17-hour day of working the polls the day before, and I looked at the total on the Taylor County election website, and I was so excited. I didn't know what to expect, but I saw that we had 15,000 Taylor County citizens show up to vote. And man, that made me happy, because it shows me that people are starting to get more engaged and more involved in making sure their voices are heard. Now, we can work on how you hear the voices, or what voice you're casting, at a later time, but at least we're showing up. And that's the hard part is we want to fix things, but we know overnight we didn't just stop voting. It's been going on for a long time. So getting people to show up allows for that conversation to help people become educated and informed. So we're already looking to March of 2024, March 5th. That's primary day. And we've got a lot of work to do to get people ready and educated and informed so they know how to show up and they know to show up and vote, and they're informed on what to vote for. And so we'll look and see at those numbers closer too, but I'm really thrilled. I feel like we had a positive step forward with this election. The only other things I did want to point out is just how close some of these were. So, and also how the down ballot works. So this is the first one, and a lot of people voted for that one, but if you notice, the second two were not voted in the same amount. Measure A had 10,200 votes. I'm not giving exact numbers. Measure B only had 10,090 votes, and Measure C had 10,100 votes, 117 votes. It wasn't the same number, and that's weird to me. Why would we not have three measures with the same number? But that's how it works. People don't always vote for things that, for some reason, I don't know why they didn't vote for one measure and they voted for two others or whatever. The difference between all three measures, between the highest voted for measure and the lowest voted for measure, was 116 a vote differential. But then the also thing I wanted to point out here is in Measure B, we had 5,120 votes for the rec center and 4,970 votes against. And that is a difference of 150 votes. Like, that is negligible. Can you imagine what would happen if 500 people showed up? Would it have gone greater? Who knows? We don't know. But I'm just telling you, if you don't know this, your voice matters and your vote matters. And it's important that you do your most basic duty in showing up to vote. The other ones were a little bit different. Measure A had a differential of about 1,800, so that was quite a significant amount. And then Measure C only had a differential of 895. So those were less significant when we're talking about the metrics of the numbers we're dealing with. But way to go, Taylor County, for showing up and voting. And I believe that gives us the indication that we had about 10,000 people show up to vote for the Abilene city limits or the municipal votes. And so that was more than voted for the mayor. And again, those are different metrics that we have to measure by, but it is significant that we did have the turnout that we had. And so kudos to everybody who worked hard to get people to know there was an election, to show up for the election. And now we can start turning towards continuing that progression, but also getting people to be better informed, because as things have stood, it seems like Abilene is good with increasing taxes to pay for extra things not covered by the budget for the last few years. Now, let's move on to our week in review. I'm adding a couple things to the week in review because these came up and I thought, wow, these might be something you would be interested in the podcast. The first one I want to point out to you is the Community Foundation of Abilene had their annual luncheon where almost 600 people joined them in person. And I think that is something we need to pay attention to because the Community Foundation of Abilene is responsible for Abilene Gives in May, and they have made a huge impact in their generosity to different organizations throughout the city. The other thing I saw this happen this week was the Abilene Heritage Square had their indoor groundbreaking. Why indoor, you ask? Well, because on Wednesday it was 95, and on Thursday when they had it, it was rainy and 56. So they managed to do it indoor, which I'm glad they were able to do that. And this kicks off the public part of their campaign. I was able to attend the Friends of the Library luncheon on Wednesday, which happens once a year, and they had Eddie Smith, who's on the board, talking about the Abilene Heritage Square, and he mentioned how this has been a project of 15 years, and in those 15 years, they are now to the point where they have raised the $55 million that they needed to get the project started, and unfortunately, due to inflation, they're going to need about $23 million more to get everything done that needs to be done, but it seems like a really great project, and I'm very thankful for all the people who worked hard to restore Abilene High originally and Lincoln High, for those of you who are there in middle school, and turn this into a place where there's a lot of different venue options and places for hopefully a new library and some great museum spaces and a lot of different aspects, in all under the premise of restoring this historic building from the 1920s. Another groundbreaking that took place this week was at the Dodge Zone's Abilene Youth Sports Authority Recreation Outdoor Complex that is behind the current complex they have. And I think this is a big deal for the city because this is a public-private partnership. The Dodge Jones Foundation and the Abilene Youth Sports Authority raised, I believe it was over $9 million to build the complex, and the city contributed $1.69 million through a bond to work on the outside part of the complex and what's called infill development. And then the city has used their ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act funds from COVID. $5 million of that is going to build these flat fields behind the original complex in the front. And so we've talked about this a little bit here and there because there has been some zoning changes. They changed this from agriculture open to general commercial or something along those lines. I can't quite remember exactly the zoning change, but this has been part of what we've been talking about, and to see it finally take place is exciting. I believe they're breaking ground in December and hoping to have it open sometime in 2025. So here's some great things happening around our community. Now to the week in the city. There was not a lot for me to report on, sadly, because the Keep Abilene Beautiful does not record their meetings. I was busy on Tuesday, so thankfully the planning and zoning meeting that we're going to talk about here was available for me, and Betty Hardwick Center has their meetings off campus, and there was the airport board meeting was canceled for unknown reasons, and so we didn't have a whole lot to follow on, but I'm so glad we didn't, because this meeting has this has so much good stuff for us to learn and take away from as citizens. And so I hope you can stick with me to see what I'm talking about. We've been talking about different boards and how there's a flow to things, and it starts at the boards and ends at the city council meeting. And I just want you to see that there's some really good connections here from the Landmark Commission meeting that we just followed up on a week or so ago. So this meeting addressed the historic overlay application for the D&W underground venue, it's called now. And I wanted to show you this timeline because they didn't have this handy presentation slides at the Landmarks Commission meeting. And so I wanted to show this to you. So in 1928, Buick bought the building. In 1931 or 32, it turned into the D&W tire store and filling station. In 1951, it became DW Furniture. And in the 1980s, it became Thomas Everett Furniture, which is what I knew the building at. And now in 2023, it's being operated as the D&W Underground venue. And there's so many neat historic elements available for us to understand about this building. And so since it's a venue, I guess you have to go when there's an event there. So I hope someone has an event there that I can go and check out all the cool stuff they have inside. But what I wanted to point out to you is, like I said, it started at the Landmarks Commission meeting, and now it's here at the Planning and Zoning. And I believe this will be its last stop before it goes to the City Council, where it will be approved, because they approved this application at both of the meetings. And so I don't see any reason why the City Council would not approve this being a historic overlay building. And so we can see how this moves up the queue to more exciting things. There you can see it's on South First. I was hoping to get to some of the pictures of it again to remind you, because I think as soon as you see it, you will know which building we're talking about. The one that has the Coca-Cola sign above it, and there it is. And that's its updated form. And I think that is a really great representation of how we can keep the history of a building and bring it into a modern use for sure. The second historic application application for historic overlay is this Victorian building that we talked about that had the street that was in the back that got to move to the front, and it was named the King House after the lawyer and judge in early Abilene, and it was built in 1910, with the Queen Anne style. I was going to see if I could get to I went too far. And there it is. So you can see that building, and we talked about that again at the Landmarks Commission, and now that's here at Planning and Zoning, and we'll probably finish up at the City Council meeting. So moving on to an unexpected surprise, but I really feel like these kind of things are super important for us to look at and evaluate and pay attention to, because we're still learning on how do we do things in the city, how do we handle stuff. And so a lady decided she wanted to change a street to her name, and she is a developer, and I think there was some really great conversation that came out of this. It was Stevenson Road that she wanted to change. And Shantae Fleming has a lot of understanding of what has been happening in the historic Black neighborhoods. And she had some great questions to ask this lady who was not from Abilene, is not living in Abilene, and she's got a lot of sites that she wants to improve and bring some change about in different cities, including one in Illinois and I guess one in Abilene. And so she asked her some great questions. And sadly, this lady did not understand the neighborhood she was building in. So she didn't even understand the importance of why changing that name could be problematic, because Stevenson is an important name in our city. And her changing it was thankfully denied by the board at this point because she hasn't really started her work on the area. And so they said, come back when you've done more work and you've actually started on your project so that we can rediscuss this in the future. And so I think it was handled well. I think good questions were asked by the board members to help her understand what part she had played. And she, like I said, she didn't even know the history behind it. And so I think the takeaway for us is we need to make sure we done the research to make sure that what we're addressing is something that hasn't already been answered or resolved. And so it's an easy mistake to make, and it's easy to just come with what you think you know. And I'm always one who finds out what I should have known, but didn't, because that's how I roll. So I relate a lot to this woman who probably didn't do enough homework. But I feel like there's sometimes you go for it and see what happens. And so we don't want to stay frozen too much, but we do want to try and do our due diligence before we show up to a meeting and have public comments to add. The next thing I thought was very important takeaway. In fact, if you had told me a couple of weeks ago that I would be able to show you how important your voice actually is, I would have not thought of how many examples that I would be able to show you. But here is one of those times where it really does matter. The Abilene neighborhood that is over near ACU, I think it's the Hillcrest neighborhood, or it's near Hillcrest Church of Christ. This is actually Judge Ely right here to the right of the screen. If you see it, Allen Ridge is over here. And there's a minor emergency clinic and a bank over here on Ambler. And so this is an open space. This is the overflow for Allen Ridge. And so over the course of several months, the neighborhood has been talking to the builder or the developer of this particular project. It's going to be senior living, to my knowledge, residential senior living. And so they have been having conversations, and what happens is when you give people feedback and input and a place to come to find a middle ground, you actually can find more of that than you realize. And so these neighbors have been very engaged and involved thanks to the developer and thanks to the activeness of this neighborhood. They have great response to things that are changing their neighborhood. They show up and let their voices be heard, and not only in the city council meeting and the board meetings, but also before it gets to that place, which I think is great. And so the response that they got from these neighbors about the approval of this was really a great conversation to show how important it is that we constantly show up and let our voices be heard. Your voice does make an impact, and they were able to actually make a difference with this neighborhood. They got the alley fixed, and there's a better wall up there to protect the neighborhood, and they got to address some of the concerns they have with the flow of traffic, because on Judge Ely, it's a school zone, and there's just a lot of moving parts happening in the city on that side of town. So this city has shown up quite a bit over and over again to let their voices be heard. So now another opportunity for citizens to have let their voices heard. This is, if you look on the screen with me, you can see this red line, and that is actually Buffalo Gap. And right over here, this yellow corner, I believe, is Holy Family. That's Hendrick Lancaster Medical Center. Golden Chick is right here, and this is the new Starbucks. I think I'm pretty observant until I realize I apparently am not. I had no idea there was a new Starbucks going in right there. And so we got to have some really great conversations, or heard some great conversations with the citizens and the city in this particular item on the agenda for rezoning. Now, what was brought to light was there's a lot of information that came out, and I'm going to have to do some research. So I'm going to try to present this as middle of the road as possible so you can understand the dynamic of why this conversation matters. And if you have 2 hours to watch this video, I would encourage you to, because it really had a lot of great conversation, and you might realize how weird I am if you watch this and think, what was she thinking? But there is a lot of good conversation to understand. I think there was probably 8 or 9 citizens that showed up to address the board on this particular point. And what came to light was how little information they felt like they were giving about what was happening right behind their house. Because I didn't point it out, but there are 3 sides of a neighborhood that are on this property that they're wanting to rezone and put a restaurant in, I think. And so while that wasn't so bad in of itself, the ways things had happened before that point left a lot of people feeling very voiceless, and that they did not have a proper way of handling this so that they could at least get their voice to be heard in the appropriate channels. And so there was some confusion about how Golden Chick was approved for the rezoning, and even some confusion if Golden Chick in fact had been cited for a violation of zoning. And that's interesting because it's already been built, and how do you handle that? And the same with Starbucks. The citizens who came and showed up said they were not made aware that Starbucks was going in that location. And so it felt like they were being cut out of the process, and that was very frustrating to them. Whether or not that's true, I haven't evaluated, but this is the frustration that they were coming into trying to figure out this restaurant situation that they were trying to be rezoned. And so it was a really good opportunity to see how things can go out of whack very quickly if communication is not maintained. And I think Clint Rosenbaum did a great job of managing this, because it really wasn't his place. Oh yeah, you can see the picture if you're watching right now where there are 3 sides to a neighborhood that they're dealing with, and that's pretty significant. But what's interesting is the chairperson was so helpful in letting people have the time to speak, but then correctly and firmly letting them know that that was not their problem, and what was before them was something completely different. And he could have shut it down in the beginning, or he could have been ugly about it and blown them off, because it really wasn't his problem to deal with. They were only talking about the current zoning issue, but in his way of honoring the citizens and giving them a place to speak and share their concerns, I think he handled it well and gave just enough room for them to share, but did not let them feel like he was going to make any promises on something he could not do. The other interesting part is there's another gentleman who works frequently with these kind of projects named Tal Fillingham, and he did such a good job of handling the tension and the frustration of the citizens' part that had nothing to do with him. And he had not, and I know that he has worked enough in the city that I have seen that he does go out of his way to communicate with citizens and talk to them. So I don't have any idea how this could have fallen through the cracks and created such a problem for this many people to show up about this particular issue. The other thing I will say is it was really interesting, not particularly on this conversation, but in other conversations, he brought to light the fact that he was part of the land development code process that was redesigned in 2008. And so there was even some conflict with the city saying they didn't think this followed the land development code. And he's like, wait a minute, I was a part of the task force that developed the land development code, and now you're telling me we're off the mark. And there was a particular gentleman on 707 who wanted to rezone the front part of his property into agricultural open space. And it was clear that this was an area of development, and for it to maintain agricultural open space on a very busy thoroughfare really didn't seem to make sense in the progression of how our city should be forming and moving forward. And so I really loved hearing all the different dynamics of understanding how this process works. And people who come before the board, if you see them a lot and they work with the city, doesn't mean they just get a free pass. They're still having to engage and learn how to navigate through some of these tricky conversations that even we, the citizens, have to go through. So I have to just say, I've just been really impressed with the way things were handled today, because it could have gotten ugly and it couldn't got out of hand. And I do think there's some questions we need to answer and find out the answers to in terms of the Starbucks and Golden Chick thing, because, we want to make sure that everyone is treated equally and fairly in the process. And that's how we have a more successful community and we can make a greater impact. We don't want people to get exceptions or get cut-arounds. And again, I don't know if that's true, and I'll look into it and update you as I'm able to find information on that. So the last part of this 2-hour meeting is this ordinance they're wanting to update. And so I'm not going to push play just yet, because I want you to be able to see the background of this ordinance that they're trying to propose that is connected to Rebuild Abbey. It's RAI is the acronym. And they mentioned it in the budget process. I believe there's $1 million going to this, where builders can take advantage of some funds available for them if they choose to work on repairing or improving the infill of our city, which are the areas that don't have active or healthy buildings or purposes on them, like dilapidated buildings or empty lots, things like that. So there is some incentive for them to build in these places. And it was presented today that in 2010, the City Council created a Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District, the NCO. And the goal of this district was to maintain character and original development patterns of the original city neighborhoods that surround the Central Business District, or the CB. However, since 2010, no property has ever been rezoned. And it was mentioned that part of it is it's a long process. It takes 4 months, and it seems to be prohibitive of people wanting to actually utilize this label. And so it has not actually achieved its objectives. And so the other thing I wanted to show you here is there are lots of neighborhoods, mostly in the north and in the older part of Abilene, but there are some in the south parts of Abilene too. And this purple boxes, all the purple you see are the ones they're trying to overlay, have this label put on there, so there is less, it doesn't take as many steps to get this actual label on the property, and then it helps with the infill development. So there are some things they're trying to do to help promote this. And I will just say, I have to give props out to Mayor Hurt on this aspect, because one of the things he did push pretty hard on his campaign is working on infill development. And I can see that he is actually doing what he said. Water is another thing he talked about, and he is actually working. I've seen some steps moving in that progress to progress that forward. And I think that we have to give shout outs to people when they are doing what they said they do, because we can then begin to count on them as to be people of their word. So there's that aspect of it. And so that is the end of the planning and zoning meeting. I hope you were able to stick with me and see how informative it was and how important it is for us to know how to handle things so that we can make a difference in our city. That concludes the week in review. And so we're going to now move on to a week at a glance, or the preview for the week to come. Just when I think I've got it all figured out, I'll just have to say thank you to the city of Abilene for making sure I'm always on my toes, because I find rhythms, I find patterns, and I notice and anticipate those to continue forward. And so what I love about the city is they want us to be really paying attention and engaged, because at the last minute, they're going to throw us a curveball. And that's what they've done for me this week. So I just want to point out to some of the meetings that are coming up this week. On November 14th, we have the Board of Adjustment at the second floor council chambers. On Tuesday, we have the Abilene-Taylor County Public Health District Board at 1 p.m. at the first floor conference room. On November 14th, which I believe is Tuesday as well, we also have the Citizens Advisory Board for People with Disabilities. This one will be recorded, and the Board of Adjustments one will be recorded, because it is actually they moved that one. So we'll have to see where that is. Or is that a typo? I don't know. I don't know where the auditorium is except for the council chamber meeting. So I think that one will be recorded. It has always been recorded. Then we have the Senior Citizens Advisory Board at 9 a.m. at Rose Park on November 15th. And then look at this one that just popped out of nowhere. I wondered why we didn't see it last week, because normally it's the first Monday of the quarter, and it wasn't. And I thought, well, maybe they had nothing to meet about. But no, not only are they not meeting on Mondays like they have done consistently for over a year, they've moved it to Wednesday. And so sadly, I will not be there, but it looks like it'll be recorded. So this will be my first library advisory board to miss in over 14 months. And I've watched more online, but in present, I've been to every one of these. So this is the one that really threw me for a curve. And, legally, they only have to give us 24-hour notice, but I just want to let you know that when we are working to make an impact in our community, we cannot get so focused on the prize that we get distracted by the frustrations along the way. And this was very frustrating to me. I have to be honest. I just don't like change, and I don't like it when people don't give me heads up. And so I am sacrificing this board for something way more important, but man, I just don't like it. since I just turned in my application to hopefully fill the vacant spot that was not filled when they decided not to appoint a person at the last council meeting on this particular board. I did ask if there was an opening and I hadn't heard word back, so I just went ahead and applied for the board anyway. So we'll see what happens. I'll keep you posted on that if anything should change. And then lastly, on the Abilene Housing Authority meeting is on Thursday, the November 16th from 9 to 10:30 a.m., as well as the Parks and Recreation Board. That's the next week. So Abilene Housing Authority is on the 16th, and that's all for that week. But you can see there is the Landmarks Commission meeting has been canceled for November 21st, and then there's only, as of right now, one more meeting, the Park and Recreation Board, and that has a lot of great information. So put that on your calendar, or at least make plans to try and watch it. And then, of course, last but not least, we have the City Council meeting on November 16th from 8:30 to 10:30 a.m. at the City Hall on the second floor council chamber room. Now, I don't think we do have Thanksgiving coming up. Woohoo! And then the Convention Center Newsboys is happening on November 11th. That should be a fun concert. Rampage Wrestling. That should be fun for those who like wrestling on November 18th. And John Chris Emotional Sport Tour. That should be interesting on November 30th. And the rest is stuff going on in our library. So I hope you can make those calendar notations so you can be ready to pay attention. And remember, my one task for you in the days to come is to find a board. There's 27. Find one that you really want to hone on in, and every month or every time that meeting meets, you will make plans to try and be informed and show up. We don't have to show up when we have problems. Let's be a city that shows up because we want to be engaged and present in what is happening in our city. And so that is all for the week at a glance. I hope that helps you. Well, let me give you this. I was looking at the agenda and I thought, there are a couple things I want to highlight here. There's not a lot on the city council agenda meeting, but there are, let's see here, is that 2 through 12 on the consent agenda item. Some things to note that they will be passing, unless they pull it, the canvassing, which just means the official document or the official record of the election, which I showed you those results that were on the packet. They're also looking at approving a construction manager at risk agreement with the city of Abilene for the Cypress Streetscape improvement. So they are moving forward on that. Then also they are going to take action on the authorization of a downtown coordinator staff position. There's some people celebrating in Abilene tonight because to have a position on the staff for a downtown coordinator, that means that is a pretty big deal. Wow. I've read through this, but I somehow glazed over that one or glossed over that one. Here is the historic overlay for the D&W venue, underground venue we talked about, and the historic overlay for that Victorian house we talked about. So that's approved. And, it's already been through 2 boards, so that makes sense. But a downtown coordinator staff position, I wonder if I should apply. Am I downtown material? Okay, then also we have the senior citizen recommendation that we just talked about. They're going to pass that on consent agenda. And so, unless there's some crazy thing that's passing, and changing the treadway, we didn't talk about that one. Then also there's another one on Spur 707. And then here we are to the regular meeting, which is a resolution to take action, award a bid for a Fallen Hero Memorial Plaza. And then they go to executive session. And then after that, this is something I always think is interesting. Why is this back after regular agenda? Is it because they hope everybody will be gone? And if so, why would they want people to leave and not be a part of this? I don't know if that's true. It's just weird that they would break for executive session and come back for this. Maybe they have to talk about it, and maybe, we assume that they're doing the right thing and never go the nefarious path, but sometimes my brain can't help it. The last thing on the regular agenda is to take action on approving the economic development agreement and lease agreement with the Abilene Youth Sports Authority for the flat fields at Grover Nelson Park. See, I told you this mattered to the city. This mattered to the citizens because we have, I don't know if in a direct way, but we are contributing $5 million to this. So I do think this private-public partnership should be something on our radar. And again, I am so excited for what the AYSA is doing for our community. It just is a struggle to understand how this private-public partnership is beneficial to all of the sports-oriented groups in Abilene, and that is something we need to look into and understand better, because we may find that every other sports-oriented business is completely fine with how the city is partnering with this one organization above any other. But now it seems that we have approved the recreation centers to be built, and we will be in competition with possibly the Abilene Youth Sports Authority. Maybe not yet, but we're just doing recreation centers. I'm not sure if we're going to be quite at the sports level, but there's a lot of just mixed information that I'm still trying to get to the bottom of and hope to understand. And so this is the process. I'm letting you in on how my brain thinks and how I've worked through to find out what I have already found out about our city and how to best make an impact in our city. And so thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast today. I hope you have found there's some helpful information that you can connect to and be able to move into a better place on your own of how to become more educated and informed. Thank you for showing up to vote. Thank you for sharing this podcast. And next time we'll talk about some exciting things, because just when you think it gets boring around here, the city of Abilene always delivers some exciting and entertaining information that keeps us on our toes. And so thank you for listening. I hope you have a great week. And until next time.